Uh, Good afternoon, everyone. It's an absolute delight to be in Barcelona today, and what we've heard so far today from the conference has been fantastic. Really interesting discussions around the health of the advanced therapy industry, and some great food for thought at the moment with regards to where the industry is going, and also some great technical innovations that we've seen and heard about today. My name is Matthew Lakelin. I'm a co-founder of TrakCel. The company was established over 10 years ago now, and we're based in the United Kingdom in Cardiff. So just a little bit about TrakCel. TrakCel is the market leader for orchestration solutions. So we have the longest-serving orchestration solution provider with the largest number of live deployments over the broadest number of therapeutic classes globally. And we have a mature experience from clinical right through to commercial. And as a business, we have an operational presence across the US and Europe. And I think what we found over the years working at TrakCel is that I'm very proud of the different types of therapeutic classes we've helped to manage and orchestrate. And not just the different types of therapeutic classes, but also the different types of products as well that we've helped to manage, different types of starting material. And what we've seen over the evolution of the cell and gene therapy industry is that really our first group of customers were trailblazers. They were helping to define the industry, really trying to work out how they were going to go about managing these types of products. But over time, what we're seeing now is a move towards a standardized way of undertaking these processes. I'm not going to be naive to say that standardization methodology is concrete now. There's still an awful lot of work to be done. And that's something that we're very proud of at TrakCel as well. We take part in an awful lot of standardization bodies and discussions around how we can introduce different types of standardization across supply chain management for advanced therapies. So for those of you that aren't familiar with orchestration systems, really we think about orchestration systems, we look about three core tenets, which is traceability, visibility, and scalability. So that traceability, we're keeping ourselves on the side of the angels when it comes to compliance. So we're thinking about chain of identity and chain of custody. So we're thinking again for autologous treatments, being able to demonstrate that a patient's drug product has been generated from their cells and from no one else's. And for matched allogeneic products, being able to demonstrate that the patient's biological profile indeed matches the donor's biological profile or the selected biological profile that's necessary. And then that visibility also encompasses activities about coordinating activities between those different stakeholders in the supply chain. I'm sure most people are aware that the supply chains, certainly for autologous, are disparate with lots of different groups of people, different stakeholders. They typically have different types of quality systems, and trying to harmonize those activities is a real challenge for our customers, and it's very difficult to do without a software-based solution to manage that. And then finally, scalability. What's really exciting for me whilst working in the cell and gene therapy industry is now that a lot of our customers are bringing therapies to commercial scale. And also what we're seeing is really an inflection and a move from advanced therapies being used to treat small patient populations to larger patient populations now. So scalability is incredibly important in order to deliver these types of products, but also scalability is incredibly important for us as an industry to make sure we can treat as many patients as possible. So I'm sure a lot of you have seen a nice simplified version of an autologous supply chain. And as I mentioned before, traceability is a core tenet of those activities. And we're thinking about chain of identity and chain of custody for those types of products. And when you think about chain of identity, you really do need to think about how you're going to identify that product throughout its supply chain. Now, what you'll find is those different types of stakeholders within that supply chain might actually use different types of identifiers, a language with which they're familiar for identifying patient-specific samples. So, for example, in a manufacturing environment, they might be using a lot number or a batch number for identifying that product. In a collection center, they might be using an apheresis identification number or a donation identification number. And then in those logistics steps, they might be using things such as waybills. So being able to unite all those different identifiers with a unique chain of identity number is incredibly important for autologous products. And then chain of custody. I think chain of custody covers two particular facets. So the first facet is, again, is from a regulatory perspective, being able to demonstrate compliance, being able to demonstrate the journey of those cells or those tissues from a tissue and transplant legislation perspective, from collection right through to disposition. But also there's that chain of custody part, being able to manage responses and managing challenges in that supply chain in real time. Knowing where that sample is in real time will help you address any delays or challenges associated with that product, especially if it's a short shelf life product. A lot of our customers at TrakCel will have at least one part of their supply chain where their drug product or their starting material may have a very short shelf life, between 48 and 72 hours. So when you do have delays, you need to be able to respond incredibly quickly. And that's sometimes a part of chain of custody management that people tend to overlook. So here's just a very quick example of an audit log that we generate from our system demonstrating who handled the cells, when and where, and also these activities are time and date stamped. Then we think about visibility for these supply chains. So coordinating those disparate stakeholders and also managing, and then we also think about managing different therapy classifications as well. So for example, coordinating those stakeholders is incredibly important, again, with those short shelf life steps. Being able to demonstrate that you can manufacture a product if you're collecting a starting material at a particular time and a particular date, especially if that starting material has a short shelf life. Something that we did with TrakCel, certainly for a first into human study, was we managed to reduce the time it took to coordinate and manage and schedule those activities, decreasing scheduling from something like 8 hours requirement for an individual person down to 40 minutes for just the way you can manage those particular supply chains. And then also management of different therapy supply chains. What you might find is as you're developing your therapy classification and developing your product, you might potentially need to change the way in which you manage your product, the way in which you manage that supply chain. So, for example, you might introduce a multi-dose regime to your treatment. And how can you do that with your orchestration system? How can you make sure you harmonize and coordinate all those activities between those stakeholders? It's incredibly important that you think about that and have a technological solution that can manage those different changes to your supply chain. And here we have a nice example of an integration we have with a MES system, being able to provide those milestone updates during manufacturing. Then also, scale up is incredibly important. So as you go through that scale up, increasing demand, perhaps adding additional steps. So for example, adding additional sites to that particular therapy classification, being able also to consider if are there any nuances associated with those new sites. What you need to do is you need to have a process and in place that recognizes that there might be site-specific variation in the way in which those products are managed. For example, one of our customers at TrakCel, they had a product where the pharmacy and the dispensing step actually took place about 1.5 miles away from where the drug product was administered. So to be able to consider those types of nuances is really, really important for your advanced therapy. Also, you've got to think about managing that chain of identity and chain of custody for new therapy classifications. So as you introduce new types of products, perhaps with new different types of requirements, how you can address those. So for example, here what we have is a personalized immunotherapy, where not only we're taking apheresis material and we're manipulating it to address and identify a single antigen. This particular process here is now where we're actually modifying that particular therapy in order to personalize based on a patient's own tumor sequencing. So how can you manage in these situations the movement of data from, or the tracking of physical assets into the tracking and management of in silico assets? So again, what I'm really trying to drive home today is that if you're going to build a system and use a system for managing your therapies, think about your therapeutic pipeline as well. Think about all those different assets you have and how you might manage them and the types of systems you're going to need in order to orchestrate your full pipeline as you move towards commercialization. And here's some, very simply, here's what we have at TrakCel. We have what we call our therapy switcher. And what this therapy switcher allows you to do when you're using our software is very simply switch between different types of therapies you have in your pipeline whilst maintaining all your data in one system. It allows you to use one compliant, validated system across your whole therapeutic pipeline. And it allows you to make sure your data is secure and safe and easy to access, but also it allows you to limit access to those different therapeutic entities as well. So access to those particular therapies are very much site-specific and user-specific, and of course HIPAA compliant and GDPR compliant too. And then finally, perhaps another sort of facet that you might need to think about for your advanced therapy supply chain is that what we're seeing now, certainly at TrakCel, is a lot of our customers are having a mixed pipeline, and they're having both allogeneic and autologous products under development. So what you need to think about here is how you're going to manage donor management. Perhaps there's an HLA matching step. How are you going to transmit that HLA data safely and securely to the groups that you're using, those tissue and transplant registries, in order to find those donors, in order to find someone who's going to donate that starting material, and then also being able to manage that chain of identity all the way through, potentially when that donor may not necessarily be located close to where the patient is being treated. And then sort of finally, I'd just like to cover the approach about scalability as well. At TrakCel, when we first started our company, we had point-to-point integrations. So that meant that with our software, we would write particular integrations into our core software product itself that would allow it to talk to individual service providers and complementary software. But what we've learned over the last few years really is that the best way to approach this is to use middleware. And so by introducing middleware, we've reduced the time it takes to build an integration with our software from about 9 months down to about 2 to 3 months. And that 2 to 3 months also includes validation of that integration too. And so by introducing that to middleware, we've sort of covered across a whole group of different types of service providers at the moment. So we've got information around enrollment with a CMED integration. We've got automated labeling in our system with our bartender integration. We've got MES integrations with Lonza and Verum and Corba. And then we've also got shipping partners as well. So those white glove couriers are integrated into our system. And then also donor matching. And finally, patient hub and payer verification services too. And by doing this, it just allows us to have a more flexible solution, a more scalable solution. And also when we have a new customer come along who's perhaps working with a different service provider or a different piece of software, it allows us to integrate with their software very, very quickly. So providing that scalability, removing the need for swivel chair integration, removing the risk associated with transcription between systems, and really making those supply chains far, far more simpler and far, far more effective, and more importantly, allowing you to treat your patients as safely and as quickly as possible. So finally, just a quick review. When you're thinking about orchestrating your advanced therapies, think about systems that can address all aspects of your therapeutic pipeline. And when you're orchestrating as well, begin with the end in mind. Begin with the end in mind. Think how you're going to manage COI, chain of identity and chain of custody management from the very, very beginning for your first patients right through to commercial scale supply. Many thanks.